I live in North Carolina now, and ironically, I had gone to Pittsburgh for a very simple operation on my neck. I had some bone spurs from athletic sports and martial arts when I was younger that were causing a lot of pain. And there was a famous Korean doctor in Pittsburgh that developed his own method of taking out these bone spurs without cutting open the back of your neck. So he goes in through the front of the neck and makes a slight incision and then moves your esophagus aside, and then he drills out these bone spurs. And it was interesting because there were people there from all over the world that came to see this doctor. So it was a very simple operation. It was you're only in the hospital one night. They do the operation, they make sure that you're stable, and then they send you home. So I went back to North Carolina, and about 3 days later, at about 11 p.m. at night, in retrospect now, I threw a blood clot. Something had broken loose from the surgery, went right into my widowmaker, and I had a massive heart attack.
Welcome in. I'm Kimberly. I'm so thrilled about our guest today. He and I have been trying to connect up for a while now, and finally we've got some time together. We actually were both in the Sedona Ascension Conference, and we had a good time, both of us individually there, and it's nice to see him again today. Before we get started, if you're enjoying this content, make sure you click that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And if you'd rather listen than watch, you can catch us on iTunes, Spotify, and all the podcast platforms. Just look up Journey to the New Earth, you'll find us there. In addition, if you're a little bit overwhelmed with what's going on around the planet, you'd like to keep up, but it just seems like too much, you might want to sign up for our Friday morning email newsletter. The link is in the description box down below. Every Friday morning, we send out a very short, very sweet, but very informative email newsletter filling in all of the things that we thought were important that happened around the planet during the week. It's super easy to sign up. It's super free. The link is in the description box down below. I think you're going to love it. In today's toxic world, taking care of our health is more important than ever. One of the natural solutions I've integrated into my routine is the benefit of mushrooms. And the go-to place for me is Birch Boys. They are without a doubt one of the greatest resources for mushroom products on the planet. Made in the USA, sustainably sourced, and run by an absolute wonderful entrepreneur, Birch Boys has become my go-to for natural health solutions. While they have a wide variety of mushroom products, the two that I use every day are right here. First, I use the ChagaNOW, which is a wonderful mixture that I put a tiny little scoop in my morning coffee to support my immune system. Chaga is one of the most effective immune support compounds on the planet, and this is a super way to get it into your daily diet in an easy to use formula and very, very effective for immune system support. And if you're looking for clear thinking, I can tell you, you'll be surprised at the effects of Lion's Mane. I use this Lion's Mane Tincture 1 teaspoon every single morning, and the difference in the clarity of my thinking is extraordinary. I was actually really surprised. Birch Boys has a whole lineup of mushroom tinctures. Make sure you check them out when you're on the website, but I'll tell you what, these are my two favorite, and I use them every single day. They are absolutely a quality company built on integrity. Go to birchboys.com and use the code NEWEARTH for 20% off your entire order. Birch Boys mushroom products, I think you're going to love it. And with that, I'd like to welcome in Rob Gentile. Rob, how are you?
I'm well, Kim. Thank you for having me. Good to see you again.
Oh, it's so nice to have you here. I appreciate you taking the time.
You bet.
Your story is very compelling. I've known about your story for a little while now. Why don't you go ahead and take us back to where your whole spiritual journey started?
Sure, love to.
And I don't think it was the Catholic Church.
Well, I was raised in the Catholic Church, certainly.
Mhm.
My parents were Italian immigrants, and I'm first generation Italian. And they immigrated through New York and ended up in a little steel mill town called Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised. And so that's where it had all begun. And there is my first chapter. I talk a little bit about my background and what happened to me, and my father being injured and eventually died from a steel mill accident when I was 5 years old. Thought I'd lost my identity, and from there, my struggle well into adulthood had started with my own spirituality and wondering, who I was, where I came from, all of those questions that most of us struggle with throughout our lifetime. But what really happened to me, the huge paradigm shift in my whole life and belief system happened actually at age 56 years old. I live in North Carolina now, and ironically, I had gone to Pittsburgh for a very simple operation on my neck. I had some bone spurs from athletic sports and martial arts when I was younger that were causing a lot of pain. And there was a famous Korean doctor in Pittsburgh that developed his own method of taking out these bone spurs without cutting open the back of your neck. So he goes in through the front of the neck and makes a slight incision and then moves your esophagus aside. And then he drills out these bone spurs. And it was interesting because there were people there from all over the world that came to see this doctor. So it was a very simple operation. It was you're only in the hospital one night. They do the operation, they make sure that you're stable, and then they send you home. So I went back to North Carolina, and about 3 days later, at about 11 p.m. at night, in retrospect now, I threw a blood clot. Something had broken loose from the surgery, went right into my widowmaker, and I had a massive heart attack. So what had happened that night, Kim, I have one child, my daughter Maria. She'll be 28 actually on the 23rd this week, but she is special needs. She has a very rare neurological disease called Rett syndrome. It comes with a seizure disorder. And at about 11 o'clock at night, my wife hears this screaming and horrible, thrashing around, and she thought it was my daughter having seizures, runs down the hall, and lo and behold, Maria's sleeping, and she comes back into the room and turns on the light, and it's me flopping around in the bed. And I told her that I had never felt a pain like that in my life. And as soon as I said that, I passed out from the pain.
Oh,
My wife dialed 911, called a neighbor to come and watch Maria, and thank goodness that the ambulance arrived very quickly. They knew that I was having a heart attack. They just didn't know how bad it was. Thankfully, we're only like 3 miles away from the hospital, so they rushed me into the hospital. By now, it's like 11:30, almost midnight. They rush me in, and they give me whatever medicine, probably nitroglycerin under the tongue, whatever it was to stabilize me. And the nurse said, "Look, the cardiologist is not in the hospital. He's been called, but it looks like your husband is stable. So that's going to be fine until the cardiologist gets here." So it's my wife and the nurse in the room. And as soon as she said that, my wife says it was like a moment from The Exorcist. It was almost as if I was laying unconscious on the gurney. And she said it was like somebody just grabbed me by my shirt and pulled me forward with great force. I sprang forward on the gurney. My eyes popped open, and I shouted out the name Frosty. And when I shouted out the name Frosty, I just fell backwards, collapsed on the gurney, and flatlined. Code blue rang out on the hospital floor, and in rushed a team of doctors. And my wife said to the doctor, who's a very good friend of mine now, an Indian woman by the name of Dr. Patel, she said, "Dr. Patel, you have to save my husband's life. We have a special needs child, and she won't make it without him, and I cannot do this alone." So they took my wife out of the room, and Dr. Patel and her team began to work on me. So this went on. Dr. Patel began with, the usual defib shocks, vigorous sternal rubs. 4 times they put the needle directly through my chest into my heart of epinephrine, and I was not responding. 5 minutes went by. 10 minutes went by.
and you're flatlined.
I'm
You've had-
flatlined.
Wow.
15 minutes went by. My organs began shutting down. 20 minutes went by. And this is all in my medical records. Finally, the cardiologist arrives and he cuts open my thigh and does a emergency catheterization up to my heart, finds the blockage in my widowmaker, inserts 2 stents, but it was too late. I was in cardiogenic shock, respiratory failure. Another doctor came in, intubated me. So now I'm on the vent where I would lay in a 4-day coma. So that's how
Oh
it
my
all happened.
gosh.
Not a good way to start.
Very, very dramatic
Yeah, not a good way to start the
experience.
story.
Now, do you have any memories, Rob, of when you were going through this? Did you see yourself from up the corner of the room, or did you have anything that you recall from that period of time?
What good question. So there were 2 very profound spiritual experiences that happened. I was in this coma for 4 days. My oldest brother lives in Pittsburgh. I was raised Catholic, although my wife and I, had not been participating. We had for the first like 10 years of our marriage after Marie was born. But my brother drove down, called the local parish priest. Parish priest came in on the second day, anointed me with oil, gave me my last rites. In the Catholic faith, this is called extreme unction. It's only given to you one time in your life to face God, forgive your sins. So I was given my last rites, and then throughout that 4-day period, there were neurologists that came in that did whatever kind of tests they do. I have no idea what they do to see if you're brain dead or not.
Mhm.
So on the 4th day, my doctor said, we can't wait any longer. We're going to pull the tubes out. If he breathes on his own, he's probably a vegetable, but we'll see what we have. So obviously, I began choking, and I went into recovery. And my wife was the first one that came into the room, and my arms were paralyzed the first couple of days after I came out of my coma. I didn't know if I was ever going to be able to use my hands or my arms again. And I remember my wife came into the room and she said I was talking like a little child. And I said, Melanie, you have to believe me. You have to believe me. It was Frosty. Frosty came to me and she said, oh my God. She said, it makes total sense now. I said, what are you talking about? She said, right before you flatlined, you sprang forward on the gurney and you shouted out Frosty's name and you collapsed backwards. And that's when you flatlined. So to give you some background, Kim, Frosty, it was my brother-in-law, same age, 56 years old. And unfortunately, 7 weeks before I died that night, Frosty had taken his own life. And Frosty was just a beautiful, peaceful soul. He was going through a divorce. He was living in the upstairs bedroom of his parents' house and separated from his wife. He had one daughter in college. He was a land surveyor. And it was around the holidays, and the pressure was building up and there was just a lot
Yeah.
of things going on. And, Frosty had had some drug abuse problems in the past, but he was clean for like 5 years. And on that night, he went out just to blow off some steam and thought to himself, hey, I'm going to do this one more time. And got a hold of some kind of a street drug that just drove him mad for like 30 minutes. So at like 5:30 in the morning, his mother called me and asked me to come to the house, which was only about 30 miles from our house here, to go up into the room and try to find a journal or a note or something that Frosty had left to give them a clue as to why he would do such a thing. And I got to tell you, that was a tough thing for me. I went up into that room 7 times and picked through a rather gruesome scene. Finally found a journal, gave it to his parents. And so my wife is standing there next to me and she said, tell me exactly what Frosty said to you. And Frosty said to me, I've made a big mess of things and you have to go back and help clean things up. But tell my parents I'm in a good place. And I have to tell you that was the first big clue in my life that God would not condemn, a loving God would not condemn anyone for such a very complicated act that no one can understand unless they're going through that kind of, trauma and struggling with addiction, struggling with whatever demons Frosty was struggling with. And it made me think about, my own faith and, my own conviction as to where I was in my life, gave me great pause. And it opened a door. And it opened a huge door because the things that were yet to come that we'll talk about, it was really Frosty that, paved the way for me. And the second thing that happened is that the second day, it was Dr. Patel that came to me. And of course, I had no idea who this woman was, who beautiful little Indian woman with glistening brown eyes. And she came into my room and she introduced herself and she said, "I'm Dr. Patel. I just want you to know that I'm the one that, refused to give up on you that night. And so many times almost lost you." And she pulled up a chair, she sat down, and she knew my arms were paralyzed. So she put her hand on mine and she began to cry. And in the conversation got very, very personal. And she said, "Rob, I have to tell you, my father and I were very, very close, and he helped me through medical school. We could almost read each other's thoughts. We had this incredible spiritual connection. And the only thing he lived for is that he wanted to see my firstborn child. He wanted to see my son's face. And 6 months before my child was born, he died suddenly from a brain aneurysm." And she said, "I'm Hindu and I had a great spiritual relationship with the creator. And I've been so bitter about that. And I've kind of lost my way." She said, "But seeing you alive, there's no way you should be alive, just gives me hope that maybe there's something out there." And it was in that moment, it was like this huge epiphany, like the puzzle unscrambled. And it struck me because after Frosty had come to me, another male spirit had entered the room and kept on repeating over and over again, "Don't give up. You can save him. Keep working on him. Don't give up. You can save him." And it struck me that it was Dr. Patel's father
It was her father. Oh my
speaking to,
gosh.
yeah,
I just got goosebumps.
it was her. And when I didn't have the courage to tell her that in that moment, because she would have thought I was crazy. And it wasn't until a year later that I decided to write my book, and I came back into the hospital to interview her, that I told her that story. And I showed up at the hospital with a dozen roses and met her in the cafeteria of the hospital. And I told her that it was her father. And that for her too was such a huge moment, because she knew then that her father never left her side. Her father has always been with her, because we're spiritual beings first, having a human experience. So why would we think that was strange? That someone who has gone before us with so much love and connection would not be with us, right?
And we think that when they cross over, they go someplace far, far away. They're right here.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, they,
Frosty was right there for you.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Frosty was right there. So that was my first near-death experience that was just seared into me, and something that I'll never forget. And that was a big part of my book, the opening to my book, Corks of Light, that I talk about those two big experiences. And it's funny because all of this comes full circle, in the end. And it was last October that the hospital here, which is Caramont Regional Hospital, they had me come to. They did a big event at a local country club, and I was given the opportunity to honor the three doctors that saved my life that night, to tell my story. It was an amazing, amazing event. So I had Dr. Patel and Dr. Bajwa, who's a Sikh. He was the cardiologist, and Dr. Carson, who was the doctor that intubated me. Were all there to be honored that night, and it was just a beautiful thing.
So take us on to the next part of your journey.
Well, so as you can imagine, being dead for more than 20 minutes, Dr. Patel was the one that told me that, the only way that I was going to survive was with a heart transplant. My heart was completely destroyed.
Oh,
So before I even left the hospital, they fitted me in this defibrillator vest, which looks kind of like a policeman's vest. My heart was so weak that it kept on going on, of course. So every time that it would stop beating, this thing would shock me
and it shocked you too.
back to life. Talk about PTSD, right? And that wasn't enough. So they realized that after a couple of weeks of wearing that I wasn't going to live very long. So they put a port in my chest, and this port was dripping this medicine called milrinone onto my heart like every 60 seconds. So I had this battery pack on my right shoulder that was running the defibrillator vest, and then I had a battery pack on my left shoulder connected to the port that was squirting this medicine. my doctor said it's kind of like SDP for a car. You know, it keeps the heart running, but it's the clock is ticking. It wears the heart out very, very quickly. So what happened to me is it was no question, it was divine intervention. I mean, I went everywhere locally to get a heart. We have two fabulous heart transplant centers here in North Carolina. One is Duke, very famous, and one is the Sanger Heart Clinic in Charlotte. But when I went to them, they were like, look, the waiting list is so long, and we don't think that you're going to make it. We just, you're way down on the list to get a heart. They said, so here's what we can do for you. We can put you in this thing called the LVAD, which I researched the LVAD, and what the LVAD is that they literally drill a hole in your heart, and they put this pump in there that just spins your blood around, tries to get it throughout your body. So less than 30% of patients that get the LVAD survive to even make it to heart transplant if a heart shows up. So most of them die from infection or strokes, things like that. So I was at my wit's end, and I called my supervisor at work in Chicago, and I told him that I was resigning from the company. I couldn't get a heart, and I was just going to die naturally. And it's curious, how things work. So at the time, I worked for a privately held company. And my boss said, before you do that, let me talk to the owner. Turns out, Kim, that the owner is a philanthropist. Heart disease ran in his family, and he donated millions of dollars a year to the University of Chicago Medicine. So he helped me and made a call on my behalf. And before you know it, I was on a plane, my wife and I, to the University of Chicago Medicine. And it was there that I met, again, another two avatars that helped save my life. When I got to the University of Chicago Medicine, they had no idea how I was even walking around, how I was even alive. And Dr. Juvenandan, a world famous heart surgeon who's transplanted over 1,500 people, including his own wife, came to me and he said, look, I've been working on this heart pump for the past 15 years. And he said, we just cut a small incision in your breast, and we fish this little balloon pump down through your aorta, your heart, and the left side of your body will be these wires connected to a pump run by an iPad, and it will pump your heart until a donor heart, arrives. And I said, wow, doc, that's incredible. I said, how many patients have had this thing? He kind of rolled his eyes. And he said, well, that's the thing. We've only had this in pigs and cows. But he said, honestly, if you don't do it, I mean, you're not going to survive, because we don't know when a heart is going to show up for you, because they're in such short supply. So I agreed to have this new pulse pump inserted in me, which tough surgery. So I had this robotic thing inserted in me, and I nicknamed it, well, my wife nicknamed it Thumper. A whole chapter.
I like that.
Yeah. There's a whole chapter in the book entitled Thumper, because the thing was, and they've improved on it now. It's like a whisper, but back then it was very clunky, and it was like, with every heartbeat, couldn't sleep. And it was just that it was an experience.
And I imagine a constant reminder for you as well.
Oh, very much so. But even though it was a difficult thing to go through, every time that thing beat my heart, it was like, okay, I'm going to live another minute. So that was an experience in itself. But there were other issues that occurred during that 3-week period, and they needed 3 weeks to see if I would survive, so they could take it to the FDA for the next step for approvals for human trials. And obviously it worked, and now it's being used throughout the country as a bridge for transplant patients. So, and they can go home with this new pulse in them, instead of waiting in the hospital for a donor heart to arrive. So it was an incredible experience. But what happened to me is that even with the heart pump, things weren't working out very well for me, because I had 6 months had passed now, and I had wizened down to about 132 pounds. I was a skeleton. I was green, and it was like every day was just another day that I was happy to be alive, but I didn't think I was going to make it. Matter of fact, my wife, when she had to just fly back and forth because she had to take care of my daughter back here in North Carolina. And the last time she saw me, she told her best friend, "I'll never see my husband again. He's not going to make it." So it was kind of curious. When she left, I had gotten pneumonia because I wasn't able to move around out of the bed very much. So I had this, I was impaled by this drainage tube. So I had pneumonia. I spiked a really high fever. They couldn't figure out what was going on. And I went through that whole process, 3 weeks of IV antibiotics and so on and so forth. And it was a rough period. So what had happened was, to top it off, there are certain things that disqualify you from getting a heart, certain medical conditions, because they are not going to waste a heart on
Yeah.
somebody. So the icing on the cake was, and I just don't want to spoil it for anyone who wants to read the book, but they had found something in me that disqualified me for heart transplant. And that was it. So I called my wife. I told her that I've been taken off the transplant list, and I knew I was going to die. So Kim, that night, what happened was, and I think that this part of my journey is so extraordinary and important. It was such a great life lesson because I think that most people have an experience like this in one way or the other. So there I was alone in my room, and I was on the 8th floor of the University of Chicago Medicine, facing Lake Michigan. And Lake Michigan, up there, it looks like the ocean, and it is. It's an enormous body of water. And out of nowhere comes this incredible storm. I mean, a storm that whipped up like I've never seen before. And the lightning and the wind and the rain was just pounding on my window. And there I was alone and just, getting ready to die. And it was almost as if a dark entity had entered the room, and it was reminding me of every shameful thing that I'd ever done in my life.
Oh,
Every mistake that I had ever made. And it was baiting me, trying to weaken my spirit. And let me tell you, it was working. And I felt like I was a magnet drawing every negative thought and energy into me. And all of a sudden, I guess it was an anxiety attack. I mean, I started sweating. My heart, what was left of it, started pounding. And there it went. I went into tachycardia, which means the heart can't pump. It's just like beating like very, very, very quickly. I could hear the alarm on the bed go off. And I just cried out to God. I said, "Do with me what you will." And I just wanted to die. And it was in that moment that I was taken up into a place that I call in the book the ethereal. And it's really difficult. It's the shortest chapter in the book. And it took me 3 years to write the book. And this was the longest and the most difficult, arduous task that I had, because there's no language for something like this. But I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. And I think the best way for me to describe this, it was kind of like when you're flying on an airplane and you're sitting by the window, and it's a nice blue sky, you're looking out the window and you see everything, but really you see nothing at all. And that was the first part of my experience of standing in the middle of nowhere. I don't see anything. And I could see my atrophied, broken body dying, laying there in the bed in this ugly green hospital gown. And I could see a hologram of myself standing in the middle of nowhere, perfect and whole, in the same hospital gown. And I thought to myself, what is happening? This is impossible. And as soon as I said that, it was almost as if I was the grains of my being were made of sand, and somebody picked me up and just scattered me across this infinite, timeless universe. And I could see this infinite, timeless space before me. And I thought to myself, I'm connected to the vast wisdom of the universe, all of it without words. And I could tell you that the five senses had no functionality in that place. In other words, I couldn't smell, taste, touch, hear anything. I remember being very disappointed because I didn't see any divine being. I'm a Christian. I didn't see Jesus Christ. There were no angels. I didn't hear any music. My parents who had gone before me didn't come to greet me. My aunt, nobody was there. It was me standing in the middle of nowhere. But yet, as soon as that happened, it was almost as if God expressed in concepts that I wholly understood. And their language there was telepathic and synchronistic at the same time. It was language of the ethereal, it was an unspoken word. But then these concepts were expressed upon me, concepts like, this is the divine source. My power is omnipotent. This is your real identity. These kind of concepts were being expressed to me. And it was then that I knew that I was in the presence of divine intelligence. And I knew then that I was not my body, my race, or my religion. I was one with this beautiful divine source of love and light. And it was almost as if I wanted to know the answer to anything, all I had to do was think about it. That was the beauty of it. And then the most extraordinary thing happened, and it's hard to describe this, but this gigantic web made of twinkling lights appeared. And it seemed as if, we know what a neuron looks like from science class. A neuron has a nucleus and it has tentacles, and it's kind of like woven together. And there was this incredible, beautiful web of twinkling lights that just seemed to stretch into infinity. And it just seemed to hang on the ceiling of the universe. And I became part of that web. I was one of those little sparks of light, that made up this web. And it was shown to me that these little sparks or quarks were made of light. And it was shown that these quarks are the smallest building blocks of matter. And some call them photons, either a photon or a quark. And these photons or quarks are multiple. There are several different quarks or photons that combine to create infinite possibilities in the universe. They can become a tree, a person, a dog, or a planet. And it was then that it was shown to me that God uses light to create, heal, and transform us. It's the same recipe for everything. We're all one, we're all connected. We just manifest differently. Whether it's animate or inanimate objects, it's all the same. We're all made of these quarks or photons of light. And I remember being connected to this web, and I knew that each little photon of light, each quark represented a life. And, in the beginning of my book, I talk about this glowing orb that descended on me in my crib. And there it was. It finally struck me 56 years later. And this orb had haunted me my whole life. And my poor mother, I question her to the day that she passed away. What was this orb of light that came to me in my crib, Mom, when I was a child? And there it was. There was the answer. And I remember being connected in this web of humanity and consciousness. And I thought, if I hurt myself here, I hurt everything connected to me. But if I love, the light will spread. And you see, that's how we light up the world. Because I've come to realize in my journey now that this web is nothing more than a reflection of what's happening here in the temporal world. It's the struggle of light and dark that humanity has been dealing with since the beginning of time. So what we do here matters because it's a reflection of our spiritual life and vice versa. And, when I was there, I thought to myself, what are these? There were some dark parts of the web. And I understood that. I thought initially that, is that evil? What is that there? But now I know that it's where human beings are not allowing or expressing this divine love and light of the Creator to come through us. I knew in that moment that God both expresses and experiences life through us. That's why it's so important that what we do here and what we become is part of this plan. We all come here with a gift, with a mission, with a purpose, and finding out what that purpose is, expressing it, is how we evolve. It's what we're here to learn. And I have to tell you this because this was even though that's fascinating enough, the most extraordinary part of it all is that while I was connected to this web, my daughter Maria is special needs and she's nonverbal and
Okay.
she can't walk, talk, feed herself. And it's a very difficult journey. And there, Maria came to me out of that web, and she came out of that web and she was standing there perfect and whole. And for the first time well, it was 20 years back then, we had a conversation in that unspoken language of the ethereal. And it was so beautiful because I asked her, I said, Maria, I've never heard your voice. I've never heard you say, I love you, Daddy. And I said, your mother and I, we've given up everything. We've taken you everywhere to find a cure, to help ease your suffering. And I said, just tell me what it is that I can do. And she said 3 words that transformed my life. She looked at me and, she had this light emanating through her eyes, not the kind of light that you and I see here in the temporal world, but that spiritual light, that light that animates all life, because that's what we are. And she looked at me and she said, just love me. And when she said, just love me, I cried out into that vast expanse that I never wanted to leave this place. I wanted to stay there with my daughter, perfect and whole. And that's when I found myself back in my hospital bed.
Yeah. Wow. What was, when you were there, Rob, what was the emotional experience? I would imagine it was very different once you kind of crashed back in your bed and was in that reality was what you were seeing.
Well, the first reality when I came back into that, broken, atrophied, dying body was that, first of all, I didn't want to live. I wanted to be back there with my daughter,
Yeah.
perfect and whole in that place, connected to everything. And I realized too in that place that loneliness is just an illusion. That how can we be lonely when we're connected to everything? It's hard for us to see it. It's this invisible world that's all around us all the time. And that's what I want people to understand. There's no need for loneliness and depression and anger and all of these things, because once we learn to open up that spiritual door, that window, we realize how beautiful life can be, and that we're here for a very short period of time, and we're here to figure out what our purpose is so we can share it with the world.
Mhm.
And purpose doesn't have to be some great thing. Purpose can be the best, the best dishwasher. It really doesn't matter. It's what resonates with you, and what makes you, what makes you feel joy and love, and connection to other people. So, in that place, I remember, and I've journaled ever since my daughter, she got sick when she was 18 months old,
Okay.
and I began journaling because I knew it was going to be a marathon. So I began journaling this whole marathon with Maria, and many times I would just journal with a tape recorder, and I did that throughout my whole heart attack and recovery, trip to Chicago, and everything that I went through. So when I went to write my book, I got all of those cassette tapes and I sent them to a transcriber, and I got back this, gigantic pile of notes, which helped me to write my book. Because if you don't write it down or put it somewhere while it's happening, your memory plays tricks on you,
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
the power of journaling and writing things down that happen in the moment, you just can't escape. So that really helped me to write my book. But I just have to tell you that once I had that experience, I remember, and I've detailed this in the book, that although I wanted to be there with Maria, I knew that I was going to live. I was given a purpose because I heard, again, pressed on my spirit, testify. So I knew that I had to share my story and somehow get it out there, even though it took me 3 years to write the book. I wrote only a couple of hours in the morning because it's the only time I had, because I still work full time and help care for Maria. So I would write between 4:30 in the morning and 7:30. There's kind of like this magic hour before the sun comes up where the muse, or what I call the Holy Spirit, comes through us, because you're kind of empty at that time of day. You know, the brain is kind of emptied out and you're refreshed, and magical things happen then. So I went through that period, Kim, and then I have to tell you, shortly after that happened, when I kind of resigned myself and let go to the fact that if I die, I die, but I know I'm going to live. Somehow my transplant doctor showed up and won an exception with the government to transplant me with my medical condition. So it was shortly after that that I was transplanted.
And clearly it was successful.
Very.
Yeah,
Yeah, very.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So did the surgery go smoothly?
it did.
Yeah,
The surgery went very smoothly. And, I got to tell you, I'll share this part of the story with you, but I'm not going to give away too much. But
right.
anyway, what happened was is that when I got my heart, I remember coming out of the ICU, coming out of that fog, and I didn't have my transplant team with me, because when you get your heart, you're with a completely different team until you get out of ICU, and then you go back into your room for recovery. But I remember, Kim, coming out of that fog, and I was laying in the bed, and as I was coming aware of what was happening, I could feel this other entity living inside me. And the heart was beating so strong that I was actually holding on to the rails of the bed, because it was beating like I was being knocked out of the bed with every heartbeat. So I had this very peculiar doctor. He was the mysterious doctor that went out in the middle of the night to get the hearts. And his last name was so long, nobody can pronounce it. So they called him Dr. O. And I remember the first day, Dr. O comes into the room, asks how I'm doing. And I said, Dr. O, you have to tell me what you put inside me, because this thing is consuming my entire being. And I feel like I've actually made a mistake, because I'm already having feelings that aren't my own. I didn't know I was going to feel this way, and I need to know what you put inside me. And he had this incredible dry sense of humor, straight face. And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, we put a Jaguar heart in you, kid." And I remember the nurse, I said, "Where's my cell phone? I gotta Google to see if it's possible to put an animal heart in another human being." I didn't know what was going on. And he kept that game face on for like 2 days, right? So I remember it was like on the third or fourth day he came in, and I said, "Dr. O, I want to see my transplant surgeon, because I want to know what you put inside me." And he gave up the ghost, and he said, "Look, I can't tell you anything about the heart. You have to wait a year and write a letter
Oh,
to the donation agency." And mine was Gift of Hope in Chicago. You have to write a letter to the agency, and then they'll send it to the family, and the family has the right to respond to you or not. But you have to wait a year for the family to mourn. And he said, "But here's what I can tell you." He said, "When we put that heart in you, it was a rare thing that happened." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, when we take your birth heart out, it's very normal for you to get depressed, and we have counseling for that. But when you put another heart in someone, the heart it's not just a muscle or an organ like people think it is. Okay, it's an intelligent soul that comes into your body. Okay, so when you put another heart in a human being, it has to figure out how to communicate with the brain, the neurological system, the parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system, hormone production, all of that. So what they found is what makes that work is that the heart has a brain.
yeah. And
And,
it
and
has a whole energy frequency all of its own.
absolutely. And Kim, this brain develops in the mother's womb very early on, because the heart is one of the first things, of course, that develops in the fetus. And that's what, of course, pumps the blood and oxygen and nutrients to the brain and to the rest of the body. So memories are stored there. A lot of your preferences are stored there. All of these things are stored there. So that's what makes heart transplantation work. This brain has to figure out how to communicate with the rest of the body. But it's so intelligent, it knows that it's not in its birth home. So it comes into a stranger's body and it goes through a period called SAG. And they literally have to jumpstart the heart and force it to beat, or else it'll just lay there and it won't connect with the body. He said, your case was very rare. And I said, how's that? He said, as soon as we put that heart in you, it
Started
just
right up.
took right off, started running. So this soul that's living inside me and expressing through me was meant to live out the rest of its life vicariously through me. And
Yeah.
it's a weird thing to say and to understand, but I really get into the science of it and explain it in the book. And but your audience doesn't. So hopefully they'll read the book. And
Yeah, it's worth the read. It really is. It's a great it's a great story. And I think what I'm really pleased about is that there is now an awareness that when you merge souls or energy patterns like happened for you,
yeah,
that creates an almost entirely new entity because you are now a merged energy frequency, your frequency and then the frequency of the
yeah.
donor. And I would imagine, I don't know this for sure because I haven't asked you and I haven't heard in other stories that you've told, that there have been experiences in your life where you're very clear that there's someone else there.
Oh, very much so. Yeah,
Yeah.
very, very much so.
How does that feel for you?
It's such a strange thing to get used to. And I really didn't understand it after I went through that whole experience with Dr. O. When I got back into my room, you know, I had a long talk with my doctor, Dr. Uriel, by the way, which is an archangel name. So Dr. Uriel and I had a conversation. He said, Rob, I got to tell you, we really don't know what we're doing. And I said, what do you mean you don't know what you? He said, we understand how to make the heart work. We understand the mechanics of it now. But he said, I mean the spiritual aspect of the heart. We really don't understand what we're doing. And he began to tell me these stories about what other heart transplant patients had gone through. Um, Stories like one of my favorite one was the big burly UPS driver who was, a UPS driver for 30 years and had a beautiful pension with it, great career, and got a heart transplant. And 2 years after transplant, he came storming into Dr. Uriel's office and said, I want all my records transferred to New Mexico because I am a 5-star chef. And this guy never ever tried to figure out who his donor was. Now, me, I just would not stop until I tracked this person down. But Dr. Uriel was curious about it, and sure enough, his donor was a 5-star Michelin chef. So, and I have 100 stories like that. And what's curious is that some people, because they're close to it, they don't have this kind of an experience.
Yeah, and I would imagine so that they just carved
Shut
it
it
off.
off. They
Yeah, shut
shut
it
it
off.
off. I'm not. It's just like I know I have several friends that were adopted and they refuse to even think about who the real parents were. They don't want to go down that road. No genetic testing. These are my real parents. Period. In the story, I don't want to talk about. So it's kind of like the same thing. But for me, you know, it has made me so much more of an empath, so much more empathetic in my life. And now I really understand, and a lot of people don't know this, but anatomically, we're all identical. And just like when I was connected to that web, and I knew that we're all one. We all come from the same place. We're all connected. And heart transplantation is a beautiful way to really kind of drive that home and help people to understand. Can you imagine if somebody were a racist and they're on their deathbed and they had to get a heart from another person that they didn't feel.
They become a little more flexible, I would
I
imagine.
think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would imagine. Humans are so funny. They're so funny. Gosh, this has been such a great conversation, Rob. Tell us a little bit more about the book and how we can connect with you, find out more about you.
Oh, sure. That's wonderful. So I was really blessed. The book became a #1 bestseller. It just went viral on its own. I'm so grateful for that because you don't write a book to get any kind of financial compensation. It's you write a book because you just have to share the story. And the most gratifying part of this whole thing for me, Kim, has been I get emails from people all over the world, saying thank you for sharing your story. And my daughter was going through this, or my husband was going through this, and it really, brought them out of the darkness and really helped them. There's so much to unpack in the book, a lot of life lessons, tough road to go down, but it was worth it. So you can get the book on Amazon. The book's title is Corks of Light, A Near-Death Experience by Rob A. Gentile. I had to use my middle initial. There's another Rob Gentile that's a famous Italian chef in Canada, and he dominates social media. So I had to put my middle name in there, but that's where you can get it. And I respond to, I try to respond to every email that I get. There is a contact page on my website, which is robagentile.com, Gentile. And you can connect with me anytime you'd like, and I'm open to having a discussion.
Oh, wonderful. And I'll have all that information listed down below. Super easy for you to find. I just want to tell you, you look fabulous. For someone who's been through the physical challenges that you have, you look healthy and happy and robust and terrific. So congratulations on such a
Well, thank you so much.
successful into a fascinating journey.
Yeah. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Kim. It's been
All
a
right.
pleasure talking with you. So good to see you. Thank you
Nice
for
to see you
having me.
too. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye now. I hope you enjoyed this video. Coming up next, this is a good one, or you might really like this one too. Either one of them could be perfect for you. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe.